What's up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blur Without Fear. Welcome back to the channel. Alright, today's video we're going to be talking about Immortal X-Men number 5 by Kieran Gillen and Michelle Bandini. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down exactly how the Quiet Council stopped the psychic onslaught of the Eternals' Unimind. We're also going to be talking about how the mutant Exodus's refusal to kill an Avenger shaped him into the mutant that he is today, and we're also going to be discussing how we just witnessed the beginning of Exodus becoming the new mutant messiah.
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
Okay, so when last we left off with Judgment Day, one of the things that happened was that the Eternals had formed the Unimind. The Unimind is basically the unification of two or more Eternals into one singular body, combining all their thoughts, their memories, their feelings, their powers, abilities, everything together into one singular being. One that is incredibly powerful, and they were using this method to launch a psychic attack against KRAKOA to paralyze its mutants, to keep them from being as efficient in fighting back against the other Eternals that were landing on the island and fighting them in force. The Unimind, for as silly as a name that it has, and for as many jokes that are made about it in the Eternals movie, the Unimind is actually something that's incredibly powerful and is very difficult to defend against. We don't know exactly how many Eternals are involved in this one particular Unimind, but it's safe to say that it's a very considerable one. When this Unimind was depicted in Judgment Day number 1, it was shown to be pretty massive, not necessarily bigger than the island of KRAKOA itself, but big enough to mimic that scene from the post-credit stingers of the MCU Eternals film where Arishem pulled up on the planet Earth. Well, once again, the Unimind in question here is not as big as Arishem was in that movie, but just the idea of how the Unimind is looking down on KRAKOA and its size from that perspective would lead one to believe that it's a pretty considerable one. It's at the very least a dozen or more Eternals coming together and forming this Unimind, possibly even upwards of 20. But Exodus is able to fight back against the Unimind because he has the help of Hope Summers and Emma Frost. Now, in this, he's actually being depicted as wielding them as a flaming sword and a shield, Hope being the flaming sword, Emma being the diamond shield. But this is basically just metaphor, because what Exodus is visualizing is something that makes sense to him. He's rationalizing what he's seen on the psychic plane by turning it into something that he would be more accustomed to. Him being a holy crusader from the 12th century, it makes sense. And he's rationalizing the Unimind into being a many-headed Hydra dragon, and this is basically what this is, but in all likelihood, it's really just Exodus, Emma Frost, and Hope working together to take down the Unimind, which, oddly enough, 3 Omega-level mutants versus 1 entire Unimind, they're more than capable of getting rid of it. It's largely the reason why Druig had so many other plans in place to ensure that they could fight the mutants on various fronts. But getting more into Exodus's history, there's a lot of things that we learn here about Exodus in this. We learn one of the moments that may or may not have coincided with the triggering of his mutant X gene. We know that Exodus fought during the Crusades, and after the sacking of Jerusalem, we learn about his first encounter with the Phoenix. Now, we don't get to learn anything more about his encounter with the Phoenix beyond the fact that it just happened, but this is something that's very huge considering the fact that for a guy like Exodus, who is a religious zealot, this is a guy who is a true believer, and for him to go through what he went through at the sacking of Jerusalem, to be abandoned and his faith truly tested, it was one of those situations that could have made or broken his faith. He could have just as clearly have seen the Phoenix and seen it as something that would have led to him renouncing his Christian faith, but instead he chose to see the Phoenix as a sign of God, that it was his Moses and the burning bush moment. Not only was it that, but he also is able to rationalize just about anything into what he needs to maintain his faith. The fact that when he sees the X that the X-Men brand themselves with he sees it as nothing more than just another form of a cross, and that what they call the X gene exists within every mutant, and that, as he says earlier, that an X is nothing more than a cross, that mutants bear the cross throughout their body. He's able to rationalize his religion into just about anything that he sees because he's that devoted, hence why he's maintained his Christian faith for roughly 1,000 years. But that alone wasn't what made Exodus who he is today. The event that actually helped galvanize him into becoming the Exodus we now know him as was the mutant apocalypse, someone who he thought was an actual mutant messiah before he met any other mutant messiahs after it. This all takes place back in 1996's Black Knight Exodus #1 by Ben Raab and Jimmy Chung. This was an issue that was actually a follow-up to 1994's Avengers number 375 by Bob Harris and Steve Epting. This was a story arc where the Eternal Circe had undergone what was referred to as Mad Weary. It's basically dementia, but for Eternals. It's something we saw in the MCU film Eternals, and it's about roughly the same thing. Your memories start getting mixed up, you start losing who you are, but the thing that was kind of downplayed but also used for dramatic effect in that film is also true in the comics. You become a more violent individual, and that is what was happening to Circe, and the Black Knight had chosen to stay with Circe and go with her on her journey when a Watcher had decided to help Circe by sending her to an alternate reality where she could maybe hopefully get better or live out the rest of her days without hurting her friends on the Avengers. During their travels through these parallel universes, they wound up in the Ultraverse, but afterwards, they wound up traveling through time, going back to 12th century BC, and it would be here that they would inhabit bodies that were either A, bodies they lived in during that time frame, case in point, Circe being in her body from when she existed back then, or B, existing in the body of one of their ancestors, which would be the case for the Black Knight, Dane Whitman. He would be transported into the body of his 12th century ancestor, Eobard Garrington, who at the time was the Black Knight, and a very close and dear friend of Exodus. This is also when Exodus would meet the mutant Apocalypse, and Apocalypse would challenge Exodus to test his loyalty by way of killing someone close to him, and who he wanted dead was the Black Knight, as well as Circe. And while Exodus did actually attempt to do this at first, he would eventually turn on Apocalypse. And while he would psychically battle Circe, as was mentioned in Immortal X-Men #5, he does actually easily and handily defeat her in a telepathic battle. Exodus would turn against Apocalypse, declaring Apocalypse a false god and using his newly found telekinetic powers to try and defeat Apocalypse, but unfortunately for old Benet du Paris, Apocalypse is far more powerful than him and handily strips him of life, essentially rendering him comatose. And it would be roughly 8 centuries in 1993's X Factor number 92 where Magneto would free Exodus and revive him, and from that moment forward, the Exodus we know today now exists. That is pretty much the reason why he lived for as long as he did, because most of the time that he was alive, he was in a coma. Exodus has worn a lot of different hats. Ever since his first appearance in X Factor number 92, he leaned into the teachings of Magneto that mutants were superior to human beings, and pretty much kind of took that same religious zealotry that he had for his Christian faith and applied it to his newfound place as a mutant. And over the course of his publication history, we would later see him renounce those ways that he originally had, and even at another point in time, tried to create peace between humans and mutants, even going as far as pretending to be one of the mutants he looks up to the most, Magneto, pretending to be him and trying to foster peace between humans and mutants on Genosha. Albeit he kind of went about it in a more forceful way than maybe Charles Xavier would have wanted to achieve that dream. And even with his failings trying to maintain peace between humans and mutants in Genosha, he'd eventually revert back to his default mutants are superior to humans ways. And pretty much we're back to where he is now. Only now he has even more reason to believe that he's been burdened with glorious purpose. Exodus is finally starting to lean into the future that Destiny had foresaw of him in Immortal X-Men number 3. At the point when Druig unleashes the Hex to take down the mutants, it's here where we kind of start to see that Exodus is he's forging his new legacy. For those unfamiliar, the Hex, these kaiju-like creatures that we see Exodus going up against, these aren't just monsters, these are actual Eternals. Eternals who are, for all intents and purposes, giant size. Now, this also means that them being giant size doesn't make them any less eternal. They have all the same powers that Eternals would normally have. Superhuman strength, stamina, durability, agility, speed, all of that stuff, they have it, just the same as any other Eternal. They also have the ability to manipulate and transmute matter into whatever they wish. They can warp reality, and they very likely have the same psionic and telepathic abilities other Eternals tend to have. And Exodus is soloing two of them without so much as flinching, showing the entirety of KRAKOA who he truly is, what it is he's truly capable of, and very likely cementing himself as the next mutant messiah. We've seen at various points in Destiny's visions that Exodus is going to be the one who is basically going to gain the faith of the entire island, and we all know Exodus is powered by faith. The more people who believe in him, as well as his belief in himself, that is what makes him even more powerful. And as you can see here, he is literally taking on one of the Hex and very likely about to kill it. And you can even see that he's recognizing it within himself. There's a point towards the end of this book, just before he flies into the Hex, that he says, "I am the Pope of a new church, like Peter was long ago. Peter was the rock upon which the Nazarene mutant built his church. I am that rock, but I'm also the rock in the hand of Cain." This is basically just a way of saying that he is going to be the shepherd, that he is the faith and peace of mind that the mutant faith deserves, but he is also the weapon to defend and attack any who stand in the way of mutants. This issue, just like all previous issues, is a case study on the character in question, whereas we've already seen with issue number 1 how it focused on Sinister and what all was going on with him, his mindset and how he's dealing with things. We also saw how the second issue delved more into the psyche of Hope Summers, whereas the third issue focused more on Destiny and issue number 4 focused more on Emma, and we know the next issue is going to be focusing very heavily on Sebastian Shaw. This is everything I felt we needed to learn so much more about Exodus, seeing him, how his faith has been tested over the years, and how he has tested himself, showing how after the events of House of M, how he flew himself to the sun and kept up a telepathic shield strong enough to block him from the heat of it, even though he didn't really truly fully need it. He can actually stand incredibly extreme temperatures, but I'm pretty sure the sun reaches his limit of how much his natural durability can protect him. But just the reveal that he plunged himself into the heart of the sun and came out of it in one piece, all because he wanted to believe in something, and the birth of Hope Summers gave him that new reignited spark to rekindle his faith. That's a huge thing for Exodus, and I can't wait to see exactly what else Kieran Gillen's going to do with this character, though I worry that once he tells the story of each of the members of the Quiet Council, he'll probably walk away from this title, but I hope he doesn't. I hope we get more out of Exodus. I feel he's a character that just does not get as much character development as I feel he deserves. Well, of course, Immortal X-Men is, right now, it's hands down one of the best X books going right now. Matter of fact, this and X-Men Red, and I've said it multiple times, these are the best books you're going to get out of X-Men right now. It's not even close. Anyways, if you want to know more about how the Black Knight is connected to the character Exodus, check out this video up here where I break down everything you need to know about the Black Knight, Dane Whitman. And if you missed my video talking about Destiny's visions about the future of the House of X, check out this video down here. In the meantime, let me know what you thought about Immortal X-Men number 5. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.